Disney magic does not have to break the bank. And in this episode of Wander and Chat, we are sharing some of the smartest ways for you to save money on your next Disney trip. Focus on the fun without focusing on the financial stress. And let's dive right in and concentrate how we get you to the mouse. All right, before we get started with our main topic today, which is a big one, and you're going to want to stick around for it, we are going to talk about Jodi's recent trip to Florida and not at a Disney hotel.
So I was there. It was a press trip with Rental Resorts, which is spelled Rentyl, and they are part of Hilton. And there's just like 5 or 6 properties in Orlando, the Orlando area, and they are focused more on like the condo type experience. And so the hotel I stayed at was the Embassy Suites by Hilton Orlando Sunset Walk. There's a few Embassy Suites, but this is a brand new one. And it is an all condo hotel. So very different from the traditional Embassy Suites, which is a hotel. Although I will say you don't necessarily know that the units are individually owned, except that there's like an owner's closet. But otherwise, they're all similar. You know, you still check in at the hotel. At this property, you also get all of the benefits that you would get from an Embassy Suites, which, you know, we've stayed at some: free breakfast, reception in the afternoon, you know, nice room with this particular room. And I had a 2-bedroom, but it had the master with a in-suite bathroom, a separate one with another bathroom, full kitchen, balcony, living room. So, you know, really nice option for any sort of Orlando vacation.
I love the multi-room thing. We have been DVC owners for a long time, but it's super expensive to be a DVC owner or even to rent DVC points. So it's nice to have an option off property.
Yeah. Yeah. And this property, it's Sunset Walk, which is kind of an entertainment, shopping, restaurant complex. And it's also next door to the Margaritaville Orlando property. So, you know, you can go there to eat, and they have a full service spa. Also, the resort I was at, it was definitely cold. I was there at the end of February, and, you know, I was wearing my winter coat I came off the plane with. Their pool closed a little early, and then you could go over to the Margaritaville pool.
Do you book this through Hilton or do you book this through individual owners?
No, you book it. Everything is done exactly like any other Embassy Suites would be. So you book it direct. They are individually owned and not like in a timeshare manner. I mean, like somebody actually owns that unit, but they still, like, you're still getting the housekeeping and you go get your key card from the front desk and all of that. So yeah, you book it directly through them.
That's pretty awesome. And it actually leads us right into our topic today, because everybody who has looked at a Disney vacation, tried to do some planning, they know how expensive Disney can be. But there are ways to save money on everything, pretty much: your hotel, your food, sometimes even your tickets.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right in and start talking about the ways that we can save money, or the ways that we've used and we recommend. And if you have a question and we haven't covered it, just go ahead, leave us a comment in our Wander and Chat Facebook group. Just go ahead and email us. We will be happy to answer it on an upcoming episode. But I'm just going to start right with, does a Disney vacation have to be expensive?
Yeah. And I think right up front, we're going to say it's a splurge, right? There's no two ways about it. This is not, that you have to have park tickets. If you're coming in from anywhere, you have to stay somewhere and you have to eat. So this is definitely a splurge. But like you mentioned, there's lots of different ways that we can recommend that you save money. And first of all, I think booking as early as you can is a huge one, because not only will you be able to take advantage of the best rates available, but you can also just start budgeting.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And if you've already booked your resort, you can, if you've booked it yourself or you booked it through a travel agent and a special offer comes out that you might be able to take advantage of, you can rebook it. You have absolutely the option to take advantage, but the earlier you book it, the better chance you have of getting the rooms that you want. And some of these, the value resorts, they sell out so quickly.
Right. And a lot of times big groups will book those too. So
yeah, so definitely you want to book early. So we were looking at hotels. That's going to be one of our biggest expenses and one of the first things that we have to plan for. So what are your best tips for saving money on a hotel? And do you recommend people stay on Disney property?
So that's a great question, and it's one I think both of us get a lot, right? Because you do have to spend quite a bit of money on a hotel regardless of where you stay. And I just gave everybody an option of a hotel I stayed at that was not on property. I think, you have to kind of weigh the benefits, right? So there's lots of benefits for staying on property. Probably fewer now than there were maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, but there still are benefits, including the early park entry, which is kind of the big one right now. So if you're staying at a resort, you can go into the park 30 minutes before anyone else. You usually can get like a ride or two in that time. And it is a lot less busy. The thing I think people who haven't been to Disney World don't necessarily understand is that this is a huge, 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 huge property. And, you just have to realize like people run marathons through this property, right? So there's no one hotel that is close to everything. There are some that are definitely more convenient than others, like the ones in the monorail, but you do have the benefit of having transportation included to the different parks, right? So that's a big benefit. If you were to stay at a property that might have a shuttle to the parks, but you just have to look at that because sometimes those shuttles run every hour. Sometimes they just drop you off in one spot. So you have to look at that, find out the schedule and how it works well in advance. But, I think the big factor of staying off property is when you get into the free breakfast and the kitchens, right? So if you're going to take advantage of that, if you want more space, but you don't want to stay in a DVC property, that's when staying off property is really going to be your best bet.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to agree. We tend to stay on property for the most part. Even when we were not DVC owners, that was my preference. And just when you consider if you're going to be going back and forth to the parks every day, free transportation in and out of the parks is not only a great benefit and an easy way to get everybody from point A to point B, but you can also park your car at the theme parks for free. And if you're off property, it's a small fortune over the course of a 4 or 5 day vacation.
Right.
And there are a lot of resorts in the Orlando area now that charge to park your car there. So one way or another, you might be paying for parking a car at a resort off property and then paying to drive it onto Disney property. So there's definitely advantages. I think maybe because my kids were never huge breakfast people, there was no real benefit to us in a hotel that had a breakfast buffet. My kids could take it or leave it. They would rather have brunch or an early lunch at a park or even at a Disney resort than to have, like a powdered egg thing at a hotel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really, you have to think about how your family vacations. And if Disney is really kind of the vacation, or if it is a part of your vacation, right? So if you're only going to go to the parks one day out of a 7-day Orlando trip, that makes things a little different.
Yeah. So let's talk about the value hotels at Disney, because I know just from booking for my family, booking for clients, the value hotels at Disney are sometimes on par with maybe what we would consider a moderate hotel off property. So is there any value in staying there? Are they worth it?
I definitely think so. I think the value hotels, they have so value hotels, we're talking about Disney's Pop Century. Art of Animation is considered a value hotel, although it has suites. So pricing wise, it's not necessarily in the value category. And then the All-Star resorts. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I like those resorts. I think with the value resort, you're not, you can either get a bus to the parks or Skyliner at Pop Century and Art of Animation. So you're mostly taking a bus. They don't have like the sit down restaurants. You'll, more than likely be eating in the food court if you're having meals on property. The rooms are nice. I like the rooms. I like the renovated rooms with the pull down beds. There's fun pools. There's great themes. They're super kid friendly. I would not bypass a value resort.
Yeah. Slightly off topic here, but I love not having a rug in a hotel room.
Definitely.
And I have heard other people say they feel like it makes the room feel cheaper. Do you like them?
I think floors are so much easier to clean. So, off topic, but especially at like a beach hotel, I love floors. But yeah, I'm all in favor of removing the rugs.
Yeah, I am too. And I don't think it detracts from the look of these resorts.
No.
I think they're still just adorable resorts.
Yeah, and especially like somewhere in Florida where you're not dealing with cold floors or anything like that, right? You don't,
Yeah.
there's definitely easier to clean, easier upkeep. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, let's talk now about something that's sort of non-negotiable, because if you're going to Walt Disney World, you're going to buy theme park tickets. So is there a way to save on those tickets?
Yeah, so, I think when you look at planning your trip, you need to look at the types of tickets that are available and just understand it because it's really important that the add-ons are what really adds on to your cost. So first and foremost, when you're booking a Disney vacation, you're going to pick the number of days. And it's important to know, because this does get into budgeting, that the more days you add, the cheaper per day it is. So, you're not just taking the cost of a 1 day ticket and multiplying it by 5 for a 5 day vacation, right? The incremental cost is much, much less. So it is better if you are taking a vacation to take a longer vacation less frequently. Add-ons are Lightning Lane Multipass, which would give you what used to be free under Fast Pass. That is not required. It does make your experience a little in lines quicker, but it's not required. And another add-on is the Park Hopper, and that allows you to go to multiple parks per day. So those things add to the cost. So if you're looking to save money, you probably want to not add those on. And then the other thing I recommend to people is, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go to the parks for 5 days, but I'm only going to go for half a day and spend a day, maximize each day. And that way you're taking full advantage of your ticket the whole day.
Yeah. What about annual passes? Is that worth it for anybody to purchase?
I mean, it's worth it if you're going to the parks enough. And the math there isn't just taking, the cost of a ticket and dividing it by how many days you're planning on going. Also have to realize that those annual passes do come with some additional discounts and benefits on like rooms and merchandise.
Yeah. And it used to be a lot easier to calculate whether there was a break even point when every park day was the same price. But now that Disney does dynamic pricing,
Right.
where it may be more expensive to go Christmas than it is, January 5th, it's harder to make that calculation. But definitely if you're going to do multiple trips a year, it might be worth it to look into. And since we're talking about tickets, what about some of these online sites, or if you're driving down 95, as we have done quite often, you'll see signs advertising Disney tickets, find them on eBay. Is this a good money saving option?
So I would recommend buying your tickets through someplace authorized, right? So, resale market's not the best option, but there are authorized third parties that sell tickets. And, those can be a great way to know about discounts and sales, and can also be a great way to save money on tickets. Absolutely. But in terms of buying them, like I'm not a huge fan of buying them when you get there, because, I think you just want to do things in advance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You don't want to wait till the last minute. And then, you might make a purchase that you haven't really researched or thought out, and, go up to Magic Kingdom, buy a single day, even though you intend to be there for 3 or 4 days. So
Right.
that could end up costing you money.
Yeah, and I should note too, we're talking specifically about Disney World, but Disneyland, for instance, still requires reservations. So I would definitely not do this at Disneyland, right? You want the tickets in advance, in your hands, loaded onto your app so that you can make those park reservations.
Yeah. So food. I think this is one area that's super flexible, and this may be the place where you can kind of tweak your budget. How
Yeah.
do you save money on food?
So yeah, I mean, I think food is a huge like variable cost, right? You can save a ton of money. And, we talked about the breakfast buffets, right? So if you are a big breakfast person, or someone who, if you eat breakfast, maybe goes lighter on lunch, staying off property at a hotel as a huge breakfast buffet for free can be a huge savings. Now, my family, we're not huge breakfast buffet people. We are kind of protein bar and coffee type people. So that's what I bring, right? Whenever we go to Disney, I like pack their favorite protein bars, eat those quickly while everybody else is getting ready. Coffee you can make in the room. You can bring your own snacks. You are allowed to bring food into the parks with some restrictions around glass and alcohol. So, bringing snacks, huge, right? Because you know how those things can add up. Water bottles can add up, right? So if you
Yeah.
bring your reusables, have cold water ready, especially when it's hot in Florida. Use ice, melts throughout the day. And then the other thing to note about Disney is the fact that, like the resorts are categorized, so are the restaurants, right? So there's table service where you're seated at a table, someone comes and takes your order, brings you your food. Those tend to be more, the most expensive option. If you are kind of short on time or you didn't make a reservation, the quick service are the type where you go up to the counter and place your order, or like we'd recommend, use mobile order. Food's available much quicker. With that, look at things like splitting meals, especially when you've got, kids that may not eat a ton. If start out small. If you realize that, hey, we need more food, you can always place another mobile order, but you definitely save money that way. And then, I think things like, character meals, that to me is where your money is best spent if you're kind of limiting what you spend on the food in the parks, because those are experiences you can't get otherwise, right? You can't. So, if your kids love certain characters, kind of prioritize that.
Yeah. I've also learned through the years that if you have your heart set on a particular restaurant experience, like Space 220 at Epcot, for example, their dining room to go and sit down at the restaurant is a fixed price meal. So everybody is going to pay
Right.
$80 for this meal, but you can get some of the same menu items by eating at the Space 220 lounge. So you're still getting to experience the restaurant, but at a much reduced price. And the same goes for Ohana. If you don't want to sit there and have all you can eat food,
Wings
you
and
can
noodles
still go to the lounge. Yeah, you can go to the lounge and get some of the same items and not spend the money for the full meal. So I think that works out if somebody's trying to kind of curtail their budget.
Yeah, and that's true of the Brown Derby. I mean, that's not a fixed price, but they have a lounge also. That's a great tip.
Yeah, it definitely makes it a little bit more affordable. And honestly, I mean, we've gone to Ohana, and by the time you finish the salad and the bread, you don't know how much meat you can put in. It's just a lot of meat. I'll have some noodles maybe, and then I'm kind of out. But yeah, it's really hard. What about souvenirs? Because especially if you have little kids, there's no way around the souvenir question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the souvenirs are everywhere, right? They are as you walk down Main Street, as you get off the rides, like for a majority of the rides. So what we always did is when my kids were little, we always set a budget for souvenirs. And the way we did it was just we saved coins all year round. And then like the week before our vacation, we went and threw them in the Coinstar machine and split the money. And that was the money the kids had for souvenirs. But you can also save money on souvenirs because, there's Disney stuff everywhere, right? So if you've got little kids, you can buy your souvenir books. I mean, your autograph books in advance. You can buy little souvenirs at, the drugstores or like the mass market stores down in Florida. And so, you can buy like the princess dresses and stuff. I know a lot of people will kind of hit up the like post Halloween sales for things like dresses and to save. So kind of doing both of those things, giving them a budget and kind of pre-buying things is a great option.
Yeah, I think looking off property for some of the items that are going to be kind of standard, you don't need to buy your autograph book at Disney if you can find it at Five Below or at Walmart. And, the local Walmart there has like a whole Disney section of all souvenirs.
Yeah, and also, it's fun too if the kids are like looking for something that's truly a souvenir, like a collectible. Things like pressed pennies can be fun to like find those machines. So, pins, like if you pick something specific that they collect and collect a few of them, buy some in advance, that's better than just kind of like going into a store and just seeing everything.
Yeah, it's so true. And speaking of Walmart, if and going back a little bit to food, you can do an Instacart order or a garden grocer order while you're down there. So you don't even have to take an extra suitcase that you're going to have to pay for to pack your snacks and stuff. You can just have them delivered straight to your resort from Walmart. And I know some of the places will even let you throw in some non-essential items and, maybe you can find a souvenir there and just have it waiting for you when you get there.
Yeah. That's a great idea, especially if you're going to get drinks, whether your kids drink like electrolyte drinks or water or whatever. If you get those delivered, stick them in your fridge. So much easier than buying them.
Yeah. Have you ever used the Target Red Card hack or the Sam's Club gift card hack?
I haven't, But I mean, I know, people do, and that's that those cards can be purchased certain times of year at a discount. And you can buy the Disney gift cards. So you buy them at a discount. Some people even go like a step further and use a credit card with good points. So now, you're getting miles for your purchase plus the gift card. But I personally haven't done that.
I haven't done it either. I did on a cruise one time, and when you think of it up front, it seems kind of like a pain in the butt because
Right.
you do have to buy a lot of the gift cards
Yeah,
to cover your vacation. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're spending, five or seven or some people even $10,000 or more on your Disney vacation, and you can save 5% using a Target Red card and buying the gift cards, it can end up being quite a bit of money. It'll definitely pay for a few meals and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mail call, question stories, let's hear it all. From you to us, it's wonder and chat. So grab a seat, let's talk just like that.
We have a couple of questions from some prior episodes, and one of the questions has to do with vacation scams. Actually, we got several comments on this. What happens, Jodi, if you get scammed? Are you getting your money back?
That is a great question. And I think, that question comes down to how you booked. So some of these scams, they've got you sending Venmo or Cash App or Zelle. You do those things, your odds, gift cards, your odds of getting the money back are slim, right? If you are using one of the platforms like Airbnb or Vrbo, you can go through them and they should handle it. Now, that's if it's a scam. If it's, a disagreement, then that's, they're going to have their own policies on how to deal with that. Like if you do go and you do stay, but things aren't exactly as you expected them to be, that's going to be very different than like you show up and it is not available for you. From what I've heard from those platforms, they will generally, do their hardest to find you an alternate property, but they should be the ones kind of dealing with your reimbursement for what you've spent. And then this is another case where, your credit card company is going to be a big benefit too. So if you use one of the major credit cards, you can do a chargeback through them. Again, this is going to be more for a scam. You can deal with them if things aren't necessarily as they seem, but they're going to have policies around that. But don't send cash if it sounds suspicious. Don't do that because it's just going to be a whole lot harder.
Yeah, that's definitely a reason not to do the wire transfers. If somebody asks for a wire transfer, just assume it's a scam. And either way, it's going to be really, really hard to get your money back.
Yeah, and if someone tries to get you off platform, like if you try to book something through a platform and then the owner messages you and says, oh, this would be cheaper if we did this offline, that's generally where you need to kind of be aware.
Yeah. And speaking of rentals and Vrbo, I won't say it the Boomer way. How much do you rely on customer reviews? Do you feel like you can trust them?
Reviews are interesting because, you typically are going to get like two sides of the story. You're going to get people who went and loved it and couldn't wait to tell other people about how much they loved it. And you're going to get people who strongly disliked it. And you rarely get people in the middle. So people who went and it was great and it was what they expected, but, it wasn't like phenomenally amazing. Those people generally don't come back and leave a review. So, but I always pay attention to reviews. And I don't pay attention to specific reviews, but I pay attention to trends. And I think what's also important here, especially post-pandemic, is that you look at the newest reviews. If it was 6 years ago, a lot could have changed. So I always sort by most recent and look for patterns.
Yeah, I think I always look at customer reviews, but I think I'm always really skeptical of them.
Right.
Like, did your cousin write this? Because this really says a lot of great things about you.
Yeah.
But you have to read them.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, the best review you're going to get is from somebody you know. And, that's 100%. If you're going somewhere, talk to people who've been there. That they've been, that they paid, full price and they're not related. But beyond that, reviews I think are a great thing.
Yeah. My sister is very, very friendly with somebody who is a rental property manager in the Outer Banks. And when we've rented places down there, I love having her to bounce things off of, because I can go to the website and I can read the reviews and I can see that, 50 people loved this place. But she will actually say to me, yeah, they loved it, but let me tell you, here are some things that maybe you should know that they haven't mentioned.
Right.
So having somebody that has walked through these properties and, maybe knows a little bit about you and, knows that, you're taking your elderly dog with you and he's not going to be able to get up 20 stairs to get into the place. Like, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
A news article in USA Today recently talked about American Airlines, and they are going to start boarding flights early. Now, I'm really following American Airlines because they're also the ones that are going to alarm you if you get in the line before your boarding group. So tell me what the deal is with their boarding earlier.
Yeah. So the thing about boarding times is that, you have to kind of back up. And one of the big questions I get from people that I know personally is, how early do you have to be at the airport, right? And especially with an early morning flight, you got a 6 a.m. flight, you got to be there 2 hours before. Do you really need to be there at 4? Most people will push back on me on that often. But the question is really, what happens if you're late, right? So gone are the days where you are running to the gate and the plane is just sitting there. The baggage closes early. The doors close early. Those doors close, you are not getting on that plane. You are not. Believe me. I've been there. I've seen the plane. I have not gotten on the plane. You need to be aware of this, right? Even if you're like a last minute person. They're starting boarding 5 minutes earlier in the hopes that things are smoother. So I don't think they're ending boarding 5 minutes earlier. I think they're just starting it 5 minutes earlier. What that means is basically everything gets shuffled forward and they start, boarding in their waves, which include, people in first class, people who with upgrades, people with the credit card, there's like 20 categories before they get to the first category. And so, yeah, it's just something to be aware of because, boarding times in general are already like 30, 35 for a domestic flight minutes early, which means, the days when we used to get to the airport an hour in advance, that's not giving you a whole lot of time to check your bag and go through security, right? So, just be aware.
Yeah, I think I like it because I'm right with you. If they tell me 2 hours early, I'm going to be there 2 hours and 45 minutes early. Right. And I generally live in fear of leaving the gate for the risk of they're going to change my gate to a different spot and I'm going to miss the announcement and I won't get the text. So I kind of like it that they're going to start boarding a little bit earlier because once I'm on the plane, like all of that stress goes away.
Right.
So I'm glad to have the opportunity, even if it's just a few minutes. Okay, now I'm going to be on the plane. Everything is going the way it's supposed to be going. Right. And I just feel better being on the plane.
Yeah. And I think that, like airlines, they run off a real small margin. So a lot of times you're sitting at the gate and the plane arrives and people are getting off of it. And you've seen, if you're getting off the plane, you've seen the flight crews already cleaning up ahead of you, right? Like this is a very, very quick turnaround. So probably means it's going to be a slightly quicker turnaround for them. But yeah, I'm curious to see, if they'll be able to pull it off. But I think it's interesting. And, how we see with the airline industry in general, when one person makes a change, then other airlines often follow. So
yeah, I'm anxious to see if it impacts on-time arrivability with these flights.
And bags too, like if they're able to get the bags on. And Anna, you had some news coming out of Sesame Place.
I do. And I don't know if this is a national story or if it's just really big locally because Sesame Street is kind of local to us. But they are going to be the first North American theme park to utilize what's called the Hidden Disability Sunflower wristbands. Now, I did not know what this was until Sesame Place made this announcement this week. But basically, the wristbands are for people that have hidden disabilities. So maybe you're an autism spectrum disorder person, or you have diabetes or a hearing disorder, something that when people look at you, they cannot see the disability. So you can go now to Sesame Place and get one of these wristbands, and the wristband will alert the team members at Sesame Place that maybe you need a little more time to board an attraction, or maybe you need a little more patience and understanding. It will definitely help them give you better service, more directed service to you. And you don't have to reveal to Sesame Place what your disability is. When you get to the theme park, you can go and check in with guest services, and they will have these wristbands for you, and it will definitely help the people at the park give you what you need. And maybe even the people around you will be a little bit more understanding if you have somebody that's a little more antsy in line, or, maybe not able to stay in line the full time that they need to run out and come back. It will, I think, alert a lot of people to conditions that are not immediately obvious, and you'll be able to get the kind of assistance that you need.
That's great.
Yeah. And this doesn't, for those of you that are local to Sesame Place, this does not impact some of their other accommodations. They still have accommodations for guests that need wheelchair assistance, people that have mobility issues. There are different entrances for people that maybe have a scooter or whatever with them. So this would be in addition to some of those services that are already in place.
Great. Thank you for joining this episode of Wander and Chat. Remember to subscribe. We are on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and other podcasting channels. And join us next time when we talk all about solo travel.